Hello everyone, I'm here with Joseph Cote. Now, this is someone I met when I was living in Boston. I would do the same lunch almost every day at this place called Cafe de Boston, and almost every day Joseph would be there. And every day we would say, "Hi, how you doing?" And every day just a little bit more. Other than that, we would, the relationship kind of built up a little bit every single day. First you see him a few times consistently, then what's your name? How you doing? Then you'll reference a conversation that you had before, and it was just really interesting to me how little things day by day can grow into something special. Me and Joseph, we have a good rapport now, and I think he's a really interesting guy. I'm back in Boston visiting for a couple weeks here, and I brought my podcasting equipment with me, not knowing who I was going to interview in Boston, and I said, "Okay, let me go to Cafe de Boston." I think this was on Thursday, and I went there and I said, "Oh damn, of course I gotta have Joseph on." Very interesting guy, always sharing stories about his past and whatnot. So Joseph, thanks for coming on the No Gradient show. How we doing?
Thanks for the invitation. Great day in Boston.
Yeah. So tell me a little bit about where are we right now?
Where are we right now? We're in a root cellar.
Cellar.
I suppose you haven't interviewed anyone in a root cellar. No, it's a fascinating story about this building. It's a two-story building, small, on Beacon Hill, on a side street called Branch that most people don't know.
Yeah, I used to run by this every day. Did not know the name of it.
Nobody does. Even people who've lived here for a long time. But interesting. It used to be called Kitchen Street.
Oh, right on.
Several decades ago. And why is that? Because this small one-way, one-block street on the hillside, not the flat, used to be carriage houses and kitchens. Now, kitchens for the famous and wealthy on Beacon Street. So this little building is a two-story with a cellar, and the top floor was for the servants. The middle floor was obviously the kitchen, and the bottom floor was cold and freezing, and it was for the gourds, the carrots, the potatoes, etc., the fruit cellar.
Yes.
So this the interesting thing is there's a tunnel that goes underground from just outside my door to the mansion on Beacon Street. So it appears as though Mama did not like the smell of gravy cooking. So the servants cooked over here and then schlepped it through the tunnel into the townhouse on Beacon Street. So anyway, the root cellar has improved. I should make that comment, as you can see.
I don't see. Do you have any roots here anymore? I don't see any.
No, but it is a cellar. They are full-size windows, but they so it's a nice brick. Lots of old brick, great history, lots of stone, and the owners have really done a great job. I call it the humble hovel.
Yes.
It's very womb-like, great in the winter.
Yes.
And okay in the summer. It's cool in the summer and warm in the winter, as a cellar would be. So
right on.
Here we are in the root cellar on Branch Street, Beacon Hill, USA.
I love that. Well, thanks for having me. I want to get started and talk. Where were you born? Let's start with that. How was the old birth, Joseph?
Well, the first 5 years of my life, I thought I was born in Canada. Actually,
Nice.
It's a bit of a confusing childhood. I tell you why. Because Papa, who French and then French-Canadian, Papa's family is from the south of France, a town called Cassis, east of Marseille, however, ended up moving to Canada. That's too long a story to tell. But Papa was a real purist and was rather upset over years that Quebec would not become its own planet as we know it wants to be.
Not just its own country, but it needs to be its own planet.
No, that's not enough. Country would be not enough. It had to be a planet. So he over the years became very disillusioned. So we learned at age 5 that, or shortly before that actually I was born over the border. In the state of Maine, in the U.S. of A., and then because the rest of his family was already living in Maine, brothers and sisters, and he was the holdout. So my sister, the same way, 5 years later, just before we moved, Mama was schlepped over the border, and both babies were born in Maine. So I'm a maniac. True blue. But my first 5 years were in beautiful, fabulous, wonderful, great memory-filled Quebec City. And then at age 5, we moved and went to French Catholic school. In Maine, in the heart of Maine, in the center of Maine, very near the one of the two large cities in Maine, Bangor. We're a bit north of that, near the university town and of Orono, and that's where it all began. So for the first 8 years of my life, it was a French Catholic school, École Saint-Joseph.
Oh, I love
I
that.
thought it was named after me, but decided shortly after that I wasn't yet a saint. But
right.
And then from there, I stayed there and went to high school, Old Town High School. The name of the town was Old Town.
There we go.
Chicago. And
wait, that was in Chicago?
No.
Like Chicago.
That's Old Town Chicago.
Got
That's a lot more interesting.
Right. Right.
And sort of, but somehow along the way, I'm not sure where it all started, but
right.
I really was determined to get out of that town, as a lot of
Yes.
people are, and the small towns they grow up in. And so I was a real geography buff, big time. I didn't really like all the other subjects, although I did all right, but geography caught my fancy.
Right. Did you go to university?
Yes, I went to the University of Maine, which is right next door, a very nice campus, beautiful New England campus. I had a wonderful time, ended up getting very, very involved, and class vice president and senior honor society, and I started an acting career there. I did a lot of acting in the theater department, which carried on for several years after that.
Did you study much geography at university?
Well, I did that mostly on my own, I must admit, but I
Right.
sort of got into anthropology, and so that got me into doing some work in Ghana, comparing the marriage customs of the Alur and the Busoga tribes.
Whoa.
I remember that distinctly.
That is
And
specific.
that's a long time ago.
Right on.
So it was from there, but it was in junior high school that in a music class, I remember this teacher, Miss Dickinson, I remember distinctly,
Miss Dickinson.
was very, very keen on Cole Porter music.
Right.
And I'll never forget a key lyric of Cole Porter's, and I'm not sure, maybe it's even the name of the song, I'm not sure, but
Right.
was "See America First." And
Right.
I sort of began to think, is he talking to me? Maybe he's talking to me. So instead of thinking of, going around the world, maybe I should see America first.
Right.
So
I think people
that's,
forget that. It's so this is such a big, beautiful country. People forget how much stuff there is here before you even leave the border.
Oh, without a doubt. And every state is its own country.
Right.
To a certain extent. I mean, even here in smaller New England, New Hampshire is different from Vermont, is different from Rhode Island. So I was determined to see America first, and I wanted all 50. I didn't want anything less than all 50.
Yes.
I'm afraid I didn't quite make it that way. I did make 36, but I got lured away out of the country before I saw all 50.
Did you do that after you graduated?
I stuck around after I graduated for a bit of time.
Okay.
Was married just after my senior year in college. And
how'd you meet her?
A theater department.
Okay.
Yes, indeed. The world of theater.
Right. You theater people, you guys, there's a lot of...
a lot of drama.
I know. A lot of drama. Right.
A lot of drama. And then I worked I stayed around for 3 years, worked for the university, and then decided it was time to go to graduate school. So we were exploring. But in that period, both of us were kind of geography geeks, and in that period, even before See America First, we made a list of 25 cities in the world outside of America that we wanted to visit. Now, we were geography buffs, but we really didn't know much other than the names of cities, and they were the obvious: Paris, Berlin, Rome, of course. But then we started going, let's pick cities that have sort of sexy romantic names like Marrakesh and Antibes and Kathmandu, Shanghai. So the list contained a lot of far-off lands that we didn't know much about, but we loved the sound of the word.
The power of names.
Yeah, the power of names.
Right. That's awesome.
So as we were about to move to St. Louis, the heart of America, I figured what better place to start to see America would be in the middle.
Right.
Unfortunately, my wife was involved in an airline accident, and so I was off with the list in my pocket, and off I went to graduate school in St. Louis, Washington University, excellent school.
Right.
And,
was that very hard on you? Was that a tough thing? How did you I guess just keep doing your thing even after that?
Well, yes, it was tough, or everyone would have to admit to that, I suppose. And but there was a spirit. There was a spirit that was alive, and a fervor, and an energy, and a karma. And I'm very big on all of those things.
Yes.
And serendipity, and all that sort of thing. And so there was some reason why it was meant to be, for whatever reason. And so, and I certainly needed to. A new environment. So off I went to St. Louis alone, went to graduate school, stayed in St. Louis, stayed a little bit in theater. I was working for Washington University while I was a student.
Okay, right on.
Studying in psychology, adolescent suicide actually was my expertise. And I found out not too long ago that the Suicide and Crisis Intervention Center that I was instrumental in founding in the town of Clayton, which if anyone knows St. Louis knows it's the neighboring town, is still there. Oh,
wow.
Still there. So
and you helped found that.
Yeah, we founded that, a group of us students. So that was it was quite great.
So I assume it's still funded to this day. It's donation based, or how do they?
No, they've been they've expanded, and they've funding. They have a director of development now, and
right on.
We didn't have quite all of that. As a matter of fact, we struggled to get telephones. So it was a big borrow and steal sort of venture at the beginning, but now it's thriving and is extremely impressive. So that was quite good.
Awesome. Okay, so you're doing that. What came next?
Well, then there was See America. So here
America
I was
first.
in the heart of America through the great arch, the great iconic arch in St. Louis, Westward Ho. So it was very inspiring, St. Louis. I mean, not everyone loves it, but I certainly did. And part of the other reason for St. Louis was because I was always fond of Tennessee Williams as a playwright, and that's where he grew up. And I had the golden opportunity of meeting him and actually producing 3 of his one-act plays that he told me when I met him that he had written to be performed together, and they had never been performed together before. So I was instrumental in producing that with him. Not long before he died, unfortunately. So
right on.
That was a great experience. But so off I went. So I did the Central Corridor is how I started. I'm one of those people, when I move to a city, I sort of take the map and then divide it into quadrants with, ruler and pencil.
Right.
So I did that with the Central Quadrant. So obviously I did everything north, Chicago, starting obviously with the Chicago area, and over to Wisconsin, and then down, all the way down, Iowa, and then St. Louis and Arkansas, and down to Texas, etc. So I did that whole strip. And then I thought, okay, I'm going to go through the arch and go west. So I finished my contract where I was and my studies.
Were you working while you were traveling?
Yes. Well, the trick was in life, and as I tell you more about the international part of my life,
we'll get to that.
It was all about trying to do what I wanted to do, but to get somebody else to pay for it. That's always the trick, isn't it?
Right.
So I knew I wanted to go west, and I thought Denver might be a good place to start because I always wanted to do Denver North and South Dakota, Wyoming, Montana, over obviously to Oregon and Washington. So I think Denver's a good gateway for that.
Right.
So I got a summer job. There it was, a summer job up in the mountains of Colorado, the largest natural body of water in Colorado, Grand Lake, which is also the name of the little boardwalk town, very cowboy town. Had a theater company.
Right on.
I said, okay, I can do this. So out I went. So that's what got me to Denver. And spent the next, I was there from 1978 to 84. So I spent 6 years in the Colorado and north of that. So I did that whole section that I wanted to do. So I sort of got tied into the rodeo circuit. I don't know how, but it traveled, and I thought, how west? Somebody coming from New England, rodeo seemed to be the quintessential American pastime and sport, and great passion and pageantry and foolishness and pride and all that wrapped into one. So I started following the rodeos.
What did you do for them?
Well, I worked in public relations and marketing for them. I was always in the next city, unfortunately. I was always getting everything ready for the next city. So off to Wyoming, frontier days up there, and then on to Montana, and then, of course, it moved around, and then ended up going south, which was what I wanted to do, so Albuquerque, Dallas, so that got me into the lower quadrant of the West.
And would you stay in hotels as you would travel?
Well, I tried not to, because if you're in a hotel, I love the local milieu. And especially in foreign countries, but some states are like foreign countries, if you don't know if you don't know the local milieu and karma. So I tried to stay with families, actually.
And how would you find them?
Through the circuit, because there was always a network, a web of people, all the local people, of course, with the sort of like the circus coming to town, the rodeo coming to town.
Absolutely.
So that was fun. Or I would, when I got down south a bit, I really was hot on Route 66,
Of course.
So I wanted to follow that route as much as possible, and I stayed in every little motel that looked like it was probably there when Route 66 was such a major thoroughfare westward bound.
Right.
So I'd stay in these tacky little no-tell motels that just said, yeah, this is the local flavor.
Right.
So I totally loved that.
I love it. And so you kept doing, and how long, so that wasn't at when you finished up with the rodeo, how many, did you keep traveling in the U.S. after that?
No, what happened was I ended up from there going to, yes, I did keep going to the U.S., but I ended up in Boise, Idaho, and had kind of skipped that state, and I don't know why. I'd gone around it a bit, and I ended up in Boise and at another theater company, summer theater company that promised to take me to Florida. So I thought, aha,
there we go.
Now we're going
get someone to pay for it.
Southeast.
Okay.
So that, I haven't done that. So I spent 2 summers there, actually. And instead of going to Florida, unfortunately, I ended up going down to Arizona. And it was at that point that I decided that even though I had given it a chance, I wasn't a very good actor. I had a good voice, and I could move on stage, and I could fight occasionally with a sword, but I wasn't great. So I sat by the pool in Arizona and thought, now let me think about this. Now, how am I going to continue this journey with somebody else paying for it? And, of course, I began to think of professions that existed everywhere on the planet. Not only, I wasn't done with America yet, but and, of course, there's the airlines, there might be the medical worlds, nursing, those sorts of things. But then I realized, as I watched a hole in the ground become a new hotel not far from my friend's pool, that, wait a minute, hotels, of course, they're everywhere.
And English-speaking people, I imagine, are in high demand all over the world in working in hotels.
In every country where even English isn't the first language.
Right.
So I went there, and somehow I acted my way through the interview, and I got hired.
Right.
I got hired for this hotel, and that was...
Now, where was this hotel?
It was in Scottsdale, Arizona.
Okay, right on.
I loved Arizona. Arizona.
Right.
So I went with that hotel. I opened that hotel. I had no idea what I was doing. I just knew that I could create a bit of theater, and it was in events, trying to create weddings and parties and all of that stuff. And lo and behold, that career lasted for 30 years. And that's how I saw the rest of America.
Right.
And then in 1993.
That's when I was born, brother.
Hey, you were born by then.
Yes.
Yay. I was in a town called Boston.
Little town called Boston.
Little town called Beantown. And I came here with the Ritz-Carlton Hotel Company, the current Taj Hotel right on Arlington Street at the Public Garden was the original Ritz-Carlton from 1926. And I got hired from there out of Indianapolis. I wanted to see Indiana, so I took a job there on the way and got hired there. Unfortunately, then they made some structural changes at my anniversary date. Thought I was getting a gold watch, but got a pink slip.
There we go.
And yay, the gods were watching. That was the gods were plotting. Why? Because I went across the common and started working for Swiss Hotel.
Okay.
Now, Swiss Hotel is based in Zurich.
Yep. There we go.
There's a stepping stone.
Part of your master plan.
There's a stepping stone here. So lo and behold, 2 years later, after Swiss Hotel here in Boston, which is now a Hyatt in the downtown Crossing area, my boss came in one day and said, Swiss Hotel's looking for a director of private events in Istanbul. And do you know anybody? And of course
I do, in fact.
No, actually, I said originally, are you nuts? Istanbul, sand and camels. And I knew nothing. I was stupid of me.
Was that a city on the list?
It was.
Oh, it was?
Bingo.
Okay.
Bingo.
There we go.
And over the weekend, coincidentally, there was a special on some television station about Istanbul, and I happened to be in the right place at the right time, watched it, went in on Monday morning, and said, yes, I do know somebody, and it's moi.
Yes.
And 5 days later, I was headed to Istanbul for an interview, and that began the tale of 20 years of traveling the world. Istanbul, I went back 3 times. It's
right on.
A brilliant city.
And do you, throughout all this, throughout traveling in the States, working with the rodeo, and then going to Istanbul, how much? Obviously, your overall master plan, I want to travel as much as possible, and I want to get someone else to pay for it. How much of the journey is finely planned? As in, I'm going to be in this location for X amount of months, then I'll think about a new location, or is it very just go with the flow, and when an opportunity comes, grab it?
Go with the flow.
Right.
I was the ultimate bohemian at that point, and there was only one stipulation, and that was way back when the list was composed, was living in a city, was
not just stopping by, right,
in a city.
Right.
So it had to be 3 months, and we came up with that thinking, 3 months, you've got to find the place to do your laundry. You've got to figure out banking. You've got to figure out money somehow, and getting money through. You've got to bank. You've got to actually live. You've got to do things. You've got to find a place to live. That's not a hotel for 3 months. So you've got to find a place to live, etc. So there was this 3 month thing. So someone gave me the advice, which I thought was brilliant, and I thank him to this day, even though he's no longer with us, bless his soul. But he said, all right, now what you should do, and this was in Istanbul, the first stop, find a niche, find an area within the business, the hotel business, where you become the expert, where you prove to the company that you're the expert there. And so what would that mean? That would mean, we need someone to go to Bali for 3 months to solve this problem. Yes, who's our expert?
Joseph.
Called Joseph.
Yes.
And unlike serving in the army where you never raise your hand, I was always the one who raised the hand first. So I was ticking off cities. And I wanted to make sure I was working for companies that had hotels on my list. Not hotels, obviously, but had destinations and locations on my list.
What were you the expert in?
I was the expert, and I was the call Joseph person on this is not working. Now, there are many experts in that field, and that breaks down into several things, but this is not working. And it was always in events or the restaurants or bars. Something's wrong here, and it's not working. We can't quite put our finger on what it is. We need another set of eyes, another set of ears. And so I developed a program on product, people, and process, my 3 Ps that would lead to profit. Ever so simple, but all logic. It was based on logic. It wasn't based on books on hoteliers and things like that.
Right.
And so I became somewhat of an expert on that. So if somebody said, if somebody said we need someone to go to a city that wasn't on my list, I didn't raise my hand.
Right.
If someone said Berlin or Rome or Paris or whatever, I did.
And would these jobs typically take about 3 months? 3 months. Damn, look at that. That is perfect.
3 to 6 months. Sometimes longer.
But hey, you go with the flow.
Not so. And sometimes I wanted to make it longer.
Right.
So,
would you drag it out a bit? No, you would never.
No, I would never do that.
You would never do that.
But I would certainly hope that it went longer.
Right.
So Paris was a perfect example. Somebody sent me to Paris for 3 months. 3 months in Paris is certainly not enough. So that proved to be longer and ended up being one of the cities I love and one of the places that I partially own, a small place. And as you sit here, you know my definition of small. Right. This humble hovel is small. Right. So I own a couple of places in far-off lands that are smaller than this, but that doesn't matter. Right. This home.
Yeah, I want to just comment quickly. So you walk into the humble hovel, and you got the bed in the living room, and the kitchen right next to that, and then the bathroom. It's like would you call this a studio? Is that
That's totally a
it's
studio.
a studio.
Yeah, right. Totally a studio with a high bed because the mattress wasn't very good, and I bought a mattress because there was no place to store the other ones, so it's two big mattresses.
Okay.
You sort of climb up.
I was going to say that's a workout.
It's a pretty big, and with 2 hip replacements not long ago, getting up into bed was a bit tricky. But anyway,
right
off
on.
the subject.
What's an example? So you something's not working. Can you give a specific example of something you worked on that wasn't working? I'm just curious.
Yeah, sure. And each one is different, of course.
Right.
But if you start with those, I first of all. I'm not shy, as you've probably figured out in our friendship over the last couple of years. But so I love talking to people, and I love asking questions. Uber drivers may get tired of me. My biggest question is, tell me, where are your ancestors from?
Right.
So I'm not shy. So I would go into a place and not talk for a long time. I would ask a lot of questions, but I'm a big observer. There's a French word for that called flaneur. I'm sure some of your followers and fans will know that word, Flaneur. Okay. A flaneur is someone who likes to sit on a park bench and watch the world go by, especially the people in the world, or sit in a club, sit anywhere, or just watch. I'm a flaneur. So I'm a good flaneur when it comes to this world, and so I would watch. And knowing that the 3 categories we were going to be dealing with were people, product, and process. So, for example, it might be the product. Let's say it's a restaurant. Right. The product. Obviously, the key concerns of a product are the food, number one, if you're talking about a restaurant. Right. But it's also everything that happens from the time somebody walks in the door. So it can be the environment, it can be the music, it can be the lighting, it can be the sound, it can be the smell. It's the whole thing about the product.
Right. So you were, when I walked into this place, music playing, it smells good in here. We got the lighting, so it's like you are. I know what you're talking about.
Yeah, and you said you liked it. So
exactly.
Therefore you walked into the right karma, so to speak.
Right.
So that could be that. It could be people, obviously crucial. People, is it an attitude? Is it a look? Is it something about the whatever they've been trained to do? Can it be the people? Could it be the maitre d'? Could it be the person who greets you? Where is that world happening when that person walks in? So let's talk about people, training, et cetera, knowledge, food knowledge. Worst thing is to ask a question and the service says, I don't know, but I'll be right back. I'll get that answer from the chef. Right. And process can obviously paper flow, efficiency, table assignments. Does a waiter take the order and then somebody else delivers the order and the order's wrong, and where do we find the waiter? And so what's the whole process from the time somebody walks in until the time they walk out? So that's sort of simplistically outlining how that would happen.
Right on. I'm curious about how would you, we have Airbnb and several other things these days where you can find what you mentioned, what you're looking for, which is let's not live in a hotel, let's live among the people. How would you find places in the hotel business? Was it using that network?
A lot of it was the network. I've never been, I'm not sure why, but I've never been much of a B&B person. Okay. And the Airbnb is a little bit better. The B&B thing was I just didn't want to deal with strangers in the morning at the breakfast table. Right. So I wasn't much of a B&B person, but an Airbnb, you can come and go, and it's like your own little apartment, to many of them anyway. Right. But I sort of, what I would do is, obviously every place I was going, I was working with the locals, and I say, here's what I want. I want something in a neighborhood that's interesting. I'm big on history, and I'm big on geography, but particular, go to Berlin. Where do you want to be in Berlin for 3 months? Right. Well, you don't want to be at the hotel, number one. You want to be near to the hotel. But what do I want to do? Well, as an American, probably something around Checkpoint Charlie. I might want to go and really explore and sponge up all of that history.
Now, Checkpoint Charlie, remind me, what was that again?
Checkpoint Charlie was the point of Americans passing, for Americans to pass between East and West Berlin.
Right. Okay. Right on.
So I really would try to say, here's my interest.
Yes.
Sort of help me out, and 9 times out of 10 that worked. I mean, even in places like Marrakesh, which was on the list. P.S.
Right.
Catch the name Marrakesh. How could you not want to go to Marrakesh?
Absolutely. Which country is that in?
In Morocco.
Morocco. Okay.
Lovely, wonderful place. Wonderful place. So that's sort of how I did it, and so I was able to sponge up. And even in Istanbul, I remember writing Tales from the Ottoman Empire, updated. I would send these vignettes. I was typing them and photocopying them in those days, but I would type up stories that happened, things you discovered, things you saw, smells, whatever, and these little vignettes, and maybe 10 pages of typed paper I would send off to 5 or 6 friends, and every once in a while one still surfaces from 1993.
Right on. Do you have anything online or anything where you share any of your stuff like this?
I don't yet, but as you know, I'm moving into retirement finally after 50 years, and there's a story to be told there.
There is a story to be told.
So I might follow the advice of so many friends over the years. You've got to write a book. You've got to write a book. Well,
yes.
So I might start small. I might start. I might start with a podcast.
Yes,
yeah, that's a good idea.
There we go.
I don't know anyone who does that, but I could research.
Right. But look at this. That's actually interesting. You talk about things just kind of fall in your lap, and as at this point in your life, we are friends, and you are now thinking about telling your story, and then boom, lift off. Here we are live on No Gradient.
Live in Boston, Massachusetts, ladies and gentlemen.
Yes. I'm curious about with the constant traveling, or the near constant, 3 to 6 months. How were friendships for you? Because that can be. Was that difficult to form really strong friendships, given you weren't in a city for more than X amount of time, or how did you deal with that?
Well, that's a really good question. First of all, I'm a solo flyer. Have been since 1974. So, so I remember when I went to Istanbul, people said, "God, you must be lonely. It's just so far away."
Right.
And I actually drew the difference between lonely and alone. And I decided then one can be alone and not lonely.
Right.
And so I sort of used that as a mantra in a way for a long, long time. I was very good at meeting friends. In the theater, there's this ongoing joke about, especially if you move around in the theater, various cities, various places, various theaters, you suddenly, because you're dealing with emotions on stage, you suddenly seem to get to know people immediately.
Interesting.
It's so fascinating. You're doing a Chekhov show, and everybody's crying and wanting to go off to Moscow. You sort of get to know each other really, really well, and you're going to be friends forever.
Right.
And you never are in touch with them again unless the two of you get cast in another show on the other side of the country.
Right,
well, in the hotel business, it's kind of that way. I mean, certainly you start by mixing with the expatriates who are in that city at that hotel. You might then further connect on to more expatriates in other hotels that everybody knows, whatever.
And how are these people working at the hotel or guests?
Yeah, working. No, always working. Yeah,
can't fraternize with the guests.
Well, there is that rule as well.
Right.
So I met a lot of people along the way from all over the world.
Right.
But I remember the first time I left Istanbul. After 2 years, I went on to Singapore because that was on the list. But I actually rented a limo. In Istanbul. It was very cheap to do that. So I rented a limo, and I took all the expatriates that I had been working with out on a limo because after the first 3 or 4 months, that was enough. I didn't come here to be with other English-speaking people from America or England or Australia or whatever. Right. I wanted the rich local scene. So I took them in this limit. I took them all to places all around town, and in Istanbul it's called Beyoğlu, for those of you who know and love Istanbul, Cihangir, Beyoğlu. I took them all to the local places that they had never been to, and they stood in awe that they even existed. And I thought, how sad. You've been in the city for 2 years and you don't know the local milieu. So then that's when I kept expanding friendships. So I always felt if I left a city with one good international friend and one good local friend, that was it.
Right.
That was enough.
Right.
Because then that was my network for the rest of my career. And I did that. In most cases, I did that.
How would you find these local places that you would then take others to? Was it just
sniffing?
Sniffing, because there was no Yelp back in those days, or Google Maps, or
no.
sniffing it out.
I was
you walked.
a walker. I'm a walker, and again, for those who listen to this and know Istanbul and know the neighborhood of Beyoğlu, which is in the new city as opposed to the old city, it's very easy. It's music, it's jazz, it smells, it's whatever. And I'm not shy. I may have said that before.
You're not shy.
I'm not shy. So,
Right.
I mean, I'll walk into a place where I'm the only expatriate. I remember I was interviewed once because I was starting a new catering arm at the last palace in the Ottoman Empire, which was called Chiran Palace. I was working there, and but in that meantime, I had made my way into a bar with wonderful music and dancing, and I was always the only expatriate.
Yes,
and it was a Kurdish bar, and in Istanbul, for those of you who know, Turkey has a big problem with the getting along, and I was always the only guy. And I would sit alone, but I was always dancing with everybody. I was always doing it. Anyway, I mentioned this bar in the interview, and the next time I went to this bar, they had, this was a newspaper interview, and they had blown up the article to 6-foot size and posted it on the wall of the bar. And as I walked in, of course, the entire bar stood up. Here I was the only expatriate in the place. That sort of thing is the greatest memory of that period.
Right. So you mentioned this bar in an interview.
I did mention it, and somebody saw it,
and they appreciated that you gave them love, and then was it a photo? Was it a photo?
It was
of
a photo and an article. The whole article was in
Wow.
Turkish. Obviously, it was in a Turkish newspaper, and so there it was. I walked in, and the table I usually sat at over there, somewhat in the corner, because as flaneurs always sort of be in the corner, and then you can see everything. They always call it a Napoleon complex in Paris. You sit in the corner so no one can come up behind you. Of course. So my table was always in the corner, and I could watch the whole place all the time. So over by my table on the wall was this 6-foot copy of the article with the photograph, and the whole bar, the bartenders, all the guests, all the people, and so it was great story. Great story. I
love that. How did you deal with the language barrier in these different?
Well, that's a good question as well. In Istanbul, when I first went, I signed up for lessons, of course, but difficult language, very difficult language. In most cases, it's reverse sentence structure, which is very difficult for us speaking English. So I go to the market becomes the market go I. So you spend all of your time trying to find the words and then rearranging them.
Right.
So I started that, but I was not very good at it. The other thing is everything adds on to the verb. So whatever the verb is, all the various pronouns and adjectives and some adverbs get added on. So a word that starts as 5 letters could end up as 18. So I decided that I wasn't going to be able to do that. So I decided I would learn vocabulary, and I would do it on my own. And I had this brilliant secretary who I said, every day, your job is you must teach me 3 new words every day. So I had this I thought it was amazing vocabulary, but it did not include verbs.
Right.
So I could learn the verb, the to form of the verb, and so I would conduct even staff meetings in Turkish. I would try, and I would have enough words, vocabulary, and tie them together with verbs in the wrong tense. But it didn't matter. It was endearing, and they thought it hilarious, and it became sort of my standard in every country, from Shanghai to, every place I went. I would learn the vocabulary as quickly as possible. So I could easily go into a bar where I didn't know anybody and there was absolutely nobody who spoke English.
Yes.
So it's not like they could send over a waiter who spoke English. And I could just try to get by, and it became humorous. It became funny, and it was part of my way of getting to know the milieu and the environment. I had a great time doing that.
Right, that's something I've done a little bit of traveling, and something I've talked to other people about and picked up on is that just the simple act of attempting to speak their language, and giving it a shot and trying to communicate with them on kind of their ground, is huge. Even if it's not, even if it's just putting some nouns together, it's just as opposed to saying something in English and then just saying it louder in English to get them to understand it. I think it's a huge. Yeah, that's a great. That's
great. The best test,
right.
the best city to test that theory in, I think, on the planet, is another planet unto itself, and that's Paris. Now, one cannot judge France by Paris, so Paris is its own world. But if you can get through Paris with that,
so that's what I heard.
Some words,
right? I heard that actually about it was Paris. It was that specifically was that they'll like you a little more if you at least try to speak French. Don't just speak to them in English. So that's interesting you bring that up.
And don't worry about the verb. Just forget the verb.
Right.
Everybody, wants to suddenly make a sentence. Don't worry about a sentence. Worry about words.
Right.
And they'll fill in the blanks and think you're clever enough to do it. I remember back in Istanbul, I would have a lot of friends visiting me there, and I would teach them 10 words that would work for their entire visit. And one of them was a word you would use, especially if you're approached, and many countries do this. A lot of us Americans don't like it, but it's part of the culture. People selling things and coming up to you. It could be on the beach. It could be, of course, walking through the bazaar. It could be walking down the street. There are good stories and sad stories about that. But in Istanbul, in those days anyway, there were a lot of children selling little packets of Kleenex or whatever. It's very sad. Or selling pencils. But in the covered bazaar in Istanbul, where there are 5,000 shops under one convoluted roof, think of it, 5,000. It's just amazing. Everybody wants to sell you the gold necklace you want to take back to Atlanta with you. So, and they would always approach you, carpets, be it whatever it was. And I used to teach people the word sonra. Sonra, very easy, sonra. And sonra means, okay, I'll come back later. Well, you're not going to come back. They know you're not going to come back.
Right.
But instead of being, as we sometimes are called, we don't have a great reputation, some of us Americans in foreign cities. If you just smiled and said, sonra, 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 they would burst out in laughter. And that was because it just was unexpected. Another one was they would always say, "How are you?" They would learn English words. In every country, everyone would try, "How are you?" Well, in Turkish, that is "Nasılsın is."
Okay,
that's a harder word than some of the other ones. Nasılsın is, and your response to that 9 times out of 10 is like our response. So if I say to you, "How are you?" you'll say, "Good, fine."
Right.
Well, the response is iyum, I-Y-I-U-M, basically, iyum, which means good, fine. Right. But I would teach them a local colloquialism, which is eine tas, eine hammam. Now, that would be in a hammam, which we won't go into that to explain it, but everyone pretty much knows what a hammam is. You use a copper bowl to put water on you, so the water comes out of the wall through usually a marble spigot, and you take a copper bowl, and a fancy one, I must say, and you pour it on you. That's how you bathe. All right, so if you say eine tas, eine hammam, that means same bowl, same hammam.
Right.
So, you could say, how would we say that in English? How are you? Same old thing. Right. Same old thing. But if you said eine tas, eine hammam, every Turk in the neighborhood of your saying that would break into laughter.
Right.
Because it was so unexpected.
Right.
So I still use it. I still use that. Eine Tas, eine Hammer.
It's amazing how powerful just a little phrase like that can be. Something I've been riffing on recently is just asking a server's name if they forget to give it to you, or asking a maitre d's name, or not necessarily at a restaurant, anything where you are being served or helped out, or a bartender's name. As soon as you ask them their name, all of a sudden it really shifts the dynamic, and they're going to, it does not all the time, but sometimes they'll maybe even give you your drink for free because you just took that little time to just kind of treat them as a little more than just a transaction, but as a human. So that's I dig that, Joseph.
Yeah, and people like that. You go into a restaurant and people say, "Welcome, Mr. Cote."
Right.
Now that means that waiter has actually gone through the work of finding out who's the host at this table and what's his name. But what a big difference that is. People love to hear their name.
They do.
Yeah, in room service training at the when I used to work at Claridge's in London, and London's a big part of the whole story. But anyway, Claridge's in London in room service training use the person's name 3 times in the conversation.
I love that.
Figure out how to use that.
Right.
I mean, it's easy to do the first one because the room number comes up and you know the name, but
right.
use it twice more in this conversation.
Right.
So people love to hear their name.
They
of
do.
Course.
They do.
They love to hear their names.
Right on. I'm curious, when these people you would meet, what was the mode of keeping in touch with them? Was it getting an address and you would mail back and forth, at least early on before email? How did you manage that?
People love color postcards. Now,
right.
How often do we do that? We don't do that quite so often anymore because we've got a million other ways of communicating, but I'm a big writer.
Right.
So, I have a card here at my elbow that eventually, instead of sending an email, I'm actually sending a card to a friend south of London today.
Right
so why get another email? Get a card. So I used to when I moved on, I would always have people's addresses, and even though I might be writing in Turkish or I might be writing in Mandarin or whatever,
right.
A picture postcard was always fun, and people love to get them.
Yes.
So I might buy 20 of the same card and send them out to 20 people. And that's it. It didn't take much, does it? You get a card with one line on it, people are thinking about you.
Totally. The little things are everything.
Oh, totally. Yes,
right.
Of course.
Right.
For sure.
Right on. I'm curious about, so more than just friends, what about lovers? Was that something that you were even looking for at all, or how did that factor in to your relationships when traveling this much?
Well, that's a very good question as well. I wasn't a very dependable lover because I was always knowing that I was getting older and the list was still there, and I was determined to make sure that I did the list.
Yes.
So that's kind of skirting the issue, but I think it all boiled down to being upfront and honest.
Right.
And, I'm here for this period of time. It might have been a 2-year contract. It might have been a 3-month contract.
But it was a contract.
But it was a contract, and,
right.
and I had a goal in life. And that goal, for better, for worse, richer, for poorer,
right.
I had that goal, and I was determined to be able to say, oh, yes, when I lived in Tunis, I had this incredible experience of buying a carpet. I wanted to be able to go into old age, which I now approach,
right.
69,
there we go.
to have a lot of stories,
right.
lot of stories to tell, and a lot of memories to go with it. And so, again, I wasn't a very dependable lover,
right.
but... Of course, and relationships, take time and take energy. And if you don't want to invest in that, then you shouldn't be in the market for a relationship.
Right.
And so I had certain things that I wanted to accomplish in life.
Right.
For better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, alone or lonely, solo or whatever. So
right. You touch on something interesting. This notion of having a collection of stories and memories. As you get older, there's something that I think there's one common narrative is that you should try to live in the present as much as possible, because be in the moment, be in the present. Don't think about the past. Don't worry about the future. And I think that's very true, and not necessarily contradicting what you're saying. But on the other hand, there's an author named Viktor E. Frankl, and he has a book called Man's Search for Meaning. He was a psychologist that ended up. He was in a concentration camp, several of them. I think he was in 3. But one of the things he said, and I'll never forget this, is that we shouldn't have a war on the past or our memories and trying to just always look into the next thing, because the past is it's set in stone and it's there forever, and there's no one that can ever change it. And there's something beautiful about that. When you do something, it's there forever, and that memory will give you pleasure forever, and nothing, no matter what, your life could go off the rails, you could die much sooner than you thought, but nothing will stop the fact that event that did happen, and it's not going anywhere.
Yeah, I'm very big on memories, but I'm not very big on living in the past.
Right.
So I'm great on memories, because I pray to God that that my mind stays intact for as long as my body stays intact.
Yes.
As a matter of fact, as you know, I'm retiring in July, and this humble hovel in which you sit at the moment
yes.
is, believe it or not, I know people will find this impossible to believe, but it is the 39th apartment in my life.
Yes.
The first one being in 1971 when I first graduated from undergraduate school. Now, some of those apartments I've been, this is the longest, I must say.
Right.
I came to Boston for 3 months and stayed 5 years.
I love that.
That's a whole story about the family and the passing of our mother, etc. But this is the longest I've ever lived in one spot, and I mean apartment, not city.
Right.
But number 40, obviously, is the next one. And
Yes.
I've been working on this place for a year. It's an apartment I don't own. I've never owned. I've never had an interest in owning. But number 40, I rented a year ago, and I've been going back and forth to it. It's almost a 4-hour drive. And it is a palace of memories.
Right.
Now, it's a small place. It's not big. It's about 900 square feet. It's on the ocean. But each area, there are 7 areas within this space, and each one represents the most vivid memories of my life. So, for example, of all places, the kitchen. The kitchen is Turkish.
Right.
Everything about it is Turkish. The colors, especially the memories of the word tulips and how tulips started in Turkey and were a gift to a group of ambassadors from Holland, and suddenly Holland became the tulip capital of the world. Great stories behind the artwork, the colors, everything about the kitchen, and that will be the vivid world in which I will live in my retirement. The next one, I was an Auschwitz scholar for 6 years, and so
wow.
the whole world of Auschwitz is very, very real to me. And so the whole dining area, even though this sounds grim, it isn't.
Right.
I've brought in 9 trees to remind me of the journey from Krakow to Auschwitz, and all the trees and all the shrubbery are taken down. This is long after the war, but so I have 9 birch trees that stand in
Wow.
the dining room. So this whole place has all been about memories. My times
Yes.
in the mountains, times by the sea, different places, times in France. So I've taken a lot of time creating and vividly painting the biggest, most memorable chapters of my life.
Beautiful.
So in case
beautiful.
the mind starts dwindling, the environment around it will continue to bring back the memories.
Right. I love that. How do you? So do you imagine you're going to be in retirement? You're going to be settling down a bit, or do you think you'll still travel occasionally, or what's your plan going
Yeah, it
forward?
would be occasional. One of the things my parents always wanted, bless their hearts, they've both passed away now, but always wondered, when are you going to settle down?
Right.
It comes from a wonderful traditional family. My mother English from the southwest of England, and my father from the south of France. When are you going to settle down? Well,
Right.
okay, number 40 seems right.
Right.
I retire on the very day of my first job. My birthday, July 15th, 1968, was the first job, and it will be the last job, July 15th, 2018. So there seems to be a number there, 50, 40th apartment. So I think it's settled down, but it is in Maine, on the Maine seaside, and so I probably will exit in the winter and go to a small place. The operative word is small.
Yes.
In the south of France, in Cassis, which is a beautiful tiny village east of Marseille, the first civilized village east of Marseille, we always say. And so I'll probably escape there. But I finished the list. We didn't get to that earlier. But I finished the list with Kathmandu. And
when did you finish the list?
Just before I moved here, actually.
Okay,
I was still living in London, and I had Kathmandu was remaining when I, of course, kept going down on the list simply because of the difficulty of making that become real, but it did. And so I'm okay. I'm traveled out. I'll visit friends in London because London is sort of my second home, so to speak. I spent 7 years total there, so coming and going 3 times, I must say. Coming and going, that's been the story of my life. So anyway, I'll go back there and to the south of France, but I think the exploring might be over, although it may not be. A train ride through northern Africa might happen again or something like that.
Right on. Now this list, do you actually have a piece of paper that survived for decades with the list of the cities on them, or was it just kind of you don't have the original?
Oh, I have the original list.
You do?
Of course. Yes, I don't have it here, so don't ask to see it. It's framed, and I've moved all of the framed artwork up to the place I'm moving to up in Maine. So it's beat up. Right. You can imagine. It's been in and out of many pockets and wallets over the years. But no, I framed it, of course. Yes.
Wow, that is.
And so it's got a place of a great esteem in the next apartment already.
Right.
So, but yes, I kept it. Yeah,
that's beautiful. Just a couple little closing things here I want to ask you is, what's something that for other people, I think a lot of people want to travel, and it's something that everyone says, oh, I want to do this one day or do this. What would you say to those people that are either on the fence or maybe even not even considering doing it? What would you say to kind of kick them in the butt?
Well, that's another very good question. There's so many different categories of people who want to travel. There are people who want to live someplace foreign. I'd love to live in a foreign country once in my life. You hear people say that.
I say that. Say that. Right.
A lot of people say that.
Right.
And the less enthusiastic or the less curious might say, well, I'd like to visit. I've always wanted to go to Paris. It's so romantic. I've always wanted to go to Paris. Or I've always wanted to go to London, especially after the royal wedding recently. People, I want to go to London. Right. Or I want to go on a safari. Or I want to go to China, the Great Wall. So many places.
Right.
So we all fall into different categories. I suppose it depends on your lust level. But a word that I have never wanted to use in the late part of my life is the word regret.
Yes.
I somehow never wanted to hear myself say, oh, I regret not doing something, not going someplace, not trying something, not learning something, not tasting something, whatever it is.
Right.
I can't imagine in my 70s, getting older every day, sitting in a rocking chair, no matter where, and having lots of regret. So that's probably the word I throw at anyone's feet is avoid regret. If you want to do it, you'll do it. And anyone who says, oh, I've wanted to go to Paris for years. No, you don't want to go to Paris.
Right.
You think you want to go to Paris.
Right.
If you wanted to go to Paris, you would have gone to Paris. I mean, it's sort of like anything. If you wanted to learn to play the piano, you would have done it.
Yes.
And people who send you emails and say, oh, I've been wanting to write for months. Don't tell me that.
Right.
If you want to write for months, you would have written.
Right.
So So it depends on your curiosity level, your sense of exploration, your ticking the list. If for nothing else, put it on the refrigerator as a list of the bucket list, the great Jack Nicholson film, the bucket list. What do you want to accomplish before it's too late?
Right.
Before it's too late, what would you like to do? It could be anything. It could be a car. It could be polishing a car. It could be learning something, whatever, learning something.
Right. I love that. Because that applies. That's not just doesn't just have to do with traveling. That's everything. What do you maybe traveling isn't your thing, but everyone can relate to not regretting.
I think that must be such a difficult emotion to live with.
Right.
I'm glad. I hope.
Right.
I hope. I have a few regrets. Come on, I have to be honest. I have a few regrets that usually revolve around people, as opposed to projects. I usually get projects done. So.
Right. Something. I'm curious what you think about this, because something I've been thinking about a lot recently is I don't want to. Let me think about how I want to word this. Let's see. Right now, for example, I don't have the bug to travel right now. I'm kind of riffing on career stuff and this no gradient stuff. But something I have thought about is if I get comfortable doing that. Even though in the moment I'm not saying I'm not making it a point to, for example, live in another country. I do say I want to do it, but to your point, do you really want to? Right now I don't. I know that I don't want to right now, but I'm thinking about maybe in 20 years, what if I never in the moment want to do it, but then in 20 years I still regret not actually just giving it a shot. So it's almost like it would be easy if I knew I wanted to go do that right now. Okay, then just set up a system to go do that. Like you set up your system, your flawless system. But if you never really in that moment really want to go do it, but then in 20 years you regret not going to do it anyway, just because just to go try it at least. I think that's something that I think about. I guess what it comes down to is I don't want to regret not wanting to do something, which is kind of a meta kind of thing. It's still a little raw. You're the first person I've shared this with.
No, I understand. Right. I understand. I think let's think about that now for a second.
Right.
I'm big on the gods. Let me start again. I spent a lot of time studying the gods, Greek, the whole world. So I'm big on the gods, and friends know that. Some of them just say, "Don't talk about the gods anymore." But the gods put things obviously in your path, and not that I don't possibly believe that I didn't control my own life, but I do think that I've had some incredibly fortunate opportunities, and the gods sometimes slap me around, and sometimes the gods just put things in my hands and say, "Hey, how about this?" So I've been extremely fortunate about that. However, if there are things that, like in the situation that you described, 20 years from now, would you border on wish I had? Other things came up that you wanted to do more.
Right.
So, for example, at the moment, this is what you want to do, this in your career. In 5 more years, maybe that won't be the case. Maybe the case would be something else, and the gods will put it in your path. So I think you sort of have to go year by year, chapter by chapter. My friends also know that I talk too much about the chapters of my life, but I think of everyone's life as a book, and some have long, long chapters. Some have only 1 chapter. Some have 38 chapters, whatever. But I'm very big on chapters. So in this current chapter, this is what's real, and this is what's important, and this is what I want. And I've got a few other things brewing, sort of like other planets up there in the solar system. Right. So the Pluto's like way out there, and Saturn's moving closer, whatever the story is. Right. But those can represent those things you want to grab onto eventually. Not now, but eventually you'd like to grab onto Pluto and live in the south of France for a year, 6 months, whatever. So go with the flow, I guess, is another way
Yes.
things people say. However, watch out, because time flies.
Yes.
And I'm big on the hourglass. The sand is sifting from day one when you came out of the womb. From moment one, the sand is sifting. So watch out, because time passes. And you want to at least have grabbed 5 of the planets, if not all of them,
Right.
before it's too late to
Right.
grab those planets.
Right.
So test yourself. Test yourself every year on your birthday. I did this for years. I still
Right.
do it. It's not the New Year. New Year's Eve is another thing to me. It's meaningless to me. But my birthday is always the time where I really, really sit down and reevaluate my solar system,
Right.
and things move in closer or farther away. It's the same way with friends and acquaintances. People move farther away, people move closer. It's an ongoing system. And I really spend a lot of time, I say, in the coming year, it's Pluto's year. We're going to really focus on
Yes.
Pluto, and we're going to grab it, we're going to play with it, we're going to turn it, we're going to bounce it, we're going to do a bunch of things with it. And we may just say, nah, it wasn't for me. You just go back to where you were in that orbit
Right.
up there. That wasn't right. It didn't
Right.
work.
I love that, because another thing I've been thinking is, if you want to explore something, even the podcast is an example. I've always wanted to do it, and even if it doesn't work out, just for the very simple reason of just wanting to, the fact that you want to do it, even if nothing's going to come of it, maybe you don't end up liking it, but just so you don't have to think about, I could have done this. Just do it for that sole reason.
It.
Just do it. Just do it, and then a lot of things people think you have to, I think, go all or nothing or shift your whole life. It's easy to try things. I think easier than most people think. Traveling is also, that takes a bit of planning, but try it.
And there should be one disclaimer. I don't want anyone to think that it's just all pie in the sky
Of
and
course.
you can do anything with your life. But obviously there are choices. Life is full of choices, isn't it? And with choice comes consequence.
Yes.
So each thing that you choose to do, whatever it is, it may stop you from doing other things. And the best example, obviously, of which I am not an expert, as I've already admitted, is relationships. So, if you get married, for example, if the marriage will change, obviously, because it's 2 of you now trying to plot the future together.
Yes.
I have this terrific physical therapist who married a woman who loves to travel. And I said, and he loves to travel, and they both like to hike. Okay, so somebody obviously made the checklist, and you don't usually say, oh, you don't like to travel, but God, you're beautiful. I think let's get married. Suddenly, the travel part of what was your solar system, you may have to give up. And then, obviously, if you have children, you're not going to go off for 3 months in Kathmandu, obviously.
Right.
So you're not going to be able to do that. I bet people along the way say, right now, it's about family. I got married. I have 3 children. There's a point at which the children will go off and start their own lives.
Yes.
Start now and think, okay, there will be a moment where instead of suffering through the empty nest syndrome, celebrate with the fact that I did this. This was a chapter. I wanted to do it. I did it to the best of my ability.
Right.
I did what I could with what I had. And then plot the next chapter. And the next chapter could be at 45, it could even be that young, that's the travel bit. Then we pull Pluto into the picture.
Yes, yes. I
really
like that analogy. Keep these things floating, and then when the time is right, pull it down.
Yeah, just grab them.
Right, I love that.
They're not going to go away, or they might go away, but they're going to come back. You've got your own solar system.
Right.
And whatever you put up there in the sky as dreams or wishes or hopes or whatever, they're there. They're never going to go away. They're never going to go away. So
right. What drives your positivity?
Wow.
You're a positive man, Joseph.
Well, that's good to hear. There have been times when I haven't been so positive, but I think out of it is I think time is short. That's such a cheap thing to say, but
Sure.
You can wallow in negativity. Obviously, it's so much easier
to
wallow in negativity.
Right.
And I think, as we all know, and I'm certainly not going to get into politics, it's hardly
the T word. The T word. Right.
Well, I'm
right.
not going to even say the T word, but I am going to say that the world we live in now here in America, and I'm not pontificating at all. I'm just saying from my own personal humble opinion, I've struggled with cynicism more so in my life, and I'm not at all involved in politics. I won't even read the front page of the New York Times if the T word appears on the front page, and pick a day where it doesn't. So I find people are becoming more cynical, not so maybe negative, but cynical, which is, of course, a horrible, toxic form of negativity.
Right.
And so I think you just rise above it. Come on, just get on, go on.
Right.
You're not going to do anything. You're just going to wallow. It's easy, so easy to wallow in that.
Totally.
And whine. Oof.
Right.
Whining.
Someone I had on my first episode, Chris Durr, he said something he lives by is positivity is a choice.
Well, that's right. That's what I said earlier. With every choice comes a consequence.
Right.
If you choose negativity, the consequences are just going to be more insurmountable. It's like climbing out of Dante's Inferno. You know, it's like, don't do that to yourself. Just don't. Okay, bad things happen. You're in a bad space at the moment from a variety of things. Keep pulling up. Keep just climbing. Keep climbing one day at a time. Anyway, I shouldn't pontificate. I am who I am and what I've done. I can't be a guideline for anybody else, and I wouldn't even claim to want to do that. But I've had some bad times and some good times.
Absolutely.
And, but I like the good times better, and I like the ones that I made. I like the ones that I climbed out of. I like the mountains that I got to the top of. With the help of the gods, of course.
Right.
But. It's much more satisfying, isn't it?
Absolutely. I love that. Well, Joseph Cote, this has been awesome. Awesome to have you on. And I just want to say one quick thing for listeners out there. I love when people reach out and tell me what they think of the episode. So feel free to email me at dick@nogradient.com. I'm also on Twitter. Just go to nogradient.com. There's a contact form there too, however you want. If you have questions for Joseph or anything like that, feel free to send them along to me, and I'll be sure that he hears them as well. And for those that have my number, text me if you listen to this. I love hearing from you people, and I'll always screenshot the text messages you send me, and I'll send it to the guest. Maybe I'm breaking your trust a little bit there, but I love doing that. That's my favorite part about this whole thing, is when someone takes something from it and shares that. So, Joseph, thank you. It's been great to get to know you over these couple years, and thank you so much for coming on and being so open.
It's great fun. You've got to come visit me in retirement.
Yes.
Camden, Maine, and Cassis in the south of France.
Ooh, international contact. There we go. I love it. Thank you so much,
Thanks
Joseph.
a lot. Take care.